Scattered beneath towering mountain ranges, hidden within dense forests, and stretching across vast, wind-scoured plains, there exist enormous stone structures whose precision feels profoundly out of place in the ancient world. We encounter blocks weighing dozens and in some cases hundreds of tons, shaped with edges so clean they appear molded rather than cut. We walk through corridors carved directly into solid bedrock, their surfaces smoothed to a level that seems to contradict the simple tools traditionally associated with early civilizations. In this documentary, we will explore 8 of the most astonishing megalithic sites ever constructed. Each one, on its own, raises difficult questions about ancient technology, organization, and knowledge. But when these sites are examined together, a far more unsettling possibility begins to emerge. Before we begin, it's important to note that while the visuals help ground these locations in reality, they are not essential to appreciating their significance. The stories, the measurements, and the sheer physical presence of these structures are powerful enough on their own. And if you enjoy long-form, deeply researched documentaries that challenge conventional narratives, consider subscribing to the channel. Now, let's begin. High in the eastern Andes, where the Vilcanota-Urubamba River twists through steep granite gorges and cloud forest drifts across knife-edged ridges, Machu Picchu occupies a narrow saddle between peaks. It does not announce itself from afar. Instead, its terraces and stone walls emerge gradually from mist and vegetation, revealing themselves through proximity rather than spectacle. The site's isolation feels calibrated rather than absolute, positioned at the boundary between cultivated highland and humid lowland, where ecological zones converge and movement would have required intention rather than chance. Before any narrative of royal estate or ceremonial retreat takes hold, the most immediate impression is one of exceptional fit. The architecture does not dominate the mountain, it completes it. Stone meets stone along contours that seem preordained by the terrain itself, as though the builders were responding to an existing logic embedded within the landscape rather than imposing an external design. The granite of this region fractures naturally into angular blocks, a quality the builders exploited with remarkable skill. Stones were shaped and set so precisely that mortar was unnecessary. Joints tighten under seismic stress instead of failing, a structural response finely tuned to the realities of an earthquake-prone environment. Such mastery suggests long familiarity with the material, knowledge accumulated through generations of observation, adaptation, and refinement. Radiocarbon dating places the primary construction of Machu Picchu in the mid-15th century CE, during the reign of Pachacuti Yupanqui and his successors. This situates the site firmly within the historical Inca state, yet the engineering appears fully mature, with no visible developmental phase preserved in the masonry. Agricultural terraces cascade down the slopes in rhythmic succession, stabilizing the mountain while expanding cultivable land. Their retaining walls are carefully drained, designed to prevent collapse during intense seasonal rains. Beneath the visible architecture lies an even more intricate system. Subterranean channels, layered gravel beds, and stone-lined conduits manage water with extraordinary efficiency. Springs are captured, flows distributed, and excess runoff shed through a network that continues to function centuries after abandonment. Water here is not merely controlled, it is choreographed, emerging at ritual fountains, flowing through public and private spaces, and disappearing into hidden channels, reinforcing its symbolic role alongside its practical necessity. The urban core is organized into zones suggesting differentiated functions: residential, ceremonial, and administrative. Yet these divisions remain fluid, lacking the rigid monumental hierarchies characteristic of other imperial capitals. Structures such as the Temple of the Sun, with its curved walls and precisely cut windows, align with solstical events, admitting light at specific times of year and linking built form to seasonal cycles. Nearby, the Intihuatana stone, carved directly from bedrock, appears to anchor ritual, observation, and landscape into a single focal point. Together, these elements imply a cosmological framework seamlessly integrated with daily life. Observation of the sky, movement of water, and management of land formed an interdependent system rather than separate domains of knowledge. Function and meaning were not divided, they reinforced one another. Interpretation is complicated by the absence of writing in the conventional sense. Inca record-keeping relied on quipu, knotted cords whose full informational capacity remains only partially understood. Modern understanding, therefore, depends heavily on Spanish chronicles written after the conquest, often filtered through colonial perspectives. These sources mention Machu Picchu only indirectly, if at all, and its omission from early colonial records suggests either deliberate concealment or a status that did not require documentation, reinforcing the sense that the site played a specialized role within a broader network. When Machu Picchu was abandoned in the 16th century, likely as a consequence of the social and political disruptions following Spanish arrival, it did not fall to siege or destruction. Instead, it was quietly reclaimed by vegetation. Its stone framework endured through isolation rather than ruin. This preservation contributes to its aura of completeness, encouraging the perception of Machu Picchu as a sudden, singular achievement rather than the visible expression of a long-standing Andean tradition of building and landscape modification. In reality, Machu Picchu draws upon architectural principles evident throughout the Inca realm and earlier cultures: polygonal masonry, terraced agriculture, seismic adaptation, and vertical ecological management. What distinguishes it is the refinement with which these elements are assembled. The site feels less like an experiment and more like a culmination, as though the builders were operating at the height of a mature system rather than at its inception. The notion of a lost civilization gains subtle traction here, not because the Inca themselves are forgotten, but because the depth of inherited knowledge embedded in the site exceeds what survives in material or textual form. Much of what made Machu Picchu possible, centuries of trial, adaptation, and transmission across rugged terrain, left few durable traces beyond the stones themselves. Its builders did not invent their methods in isolation. They drew from a reservoir of Andean expertise shaped by seismic realities, climatic variability, and vertical ecology. Many of that reservoir's earliest contributions have been eroded, buried, or overwritten by time. Machu Picchu thus stands as both culmination and fragment, a place where techniques perfected over long spans converged into a single coherent expression. Its apparent perfection can obscure the fragility of the systems that sustained it, systems vulnerable to political upheaval and demographic collapse rather than technical failure. As clouds drift across the terraces and water threads softly through hidden channels, the site offers no challenge to established history. Instead, it quietly emphasizes how much human achievement depends on continuity rather than innovation alone. A lost civilization need not imply vanished cities swallowed whole by time. It can also mean the gradual thinning of memory, where practices once widespread become visible only in their most refined survivors. Machu Picchu does not ask to be sensationalized or reattributed. It asks to be understood as a moment when accumulated knowledge briefly aligned with landscape, belief, and power, producing an environment so resolved that its abandonment feels like an interruption rather than an ending. Suspended between empire and forest, the site remains both complete and incomplete. It stands as a reminder that even well-documented civilizations rest upon deeper foundations rarely seen in full, and that what appears sudden or miraculous is often the quiet outcome of long, unrecorded human persistence. Sigiriya rises suddenly from the level plains of central Sri Lanka, an immense presence interrupting the horizontal calm of the landscape. From a distance, it does not read as a conventional hill or mountain. Instead, it appears almost deliberate, as if positioned rather than formed, its abrupt verticality commanding attention long before its details become visible. The way light moves across its sheer faces reinforces this impression, lending the rock an artificial clarity that quietly unsettles the viewer. Geologically, Sigiriya is understood to be the hardened remnant of an ancient volcanic formation, likely a magma plug left behind after surrounding material eroded away. Over immense spans of time, weathering sculpted this mass into a near vertical monolith, rising roughly 200 meters above the plains. Long before any human intervention, it would have stood as a dominant landmark, visible across great distances, anchoring movement, orientation, and perhaps meaning within the surrounding terrain. Archaeological evidence confirms that human presence here predates its famous royal phase by many centuries. Rock shelters around the base contain traces of occupation stretching back thousands of years, while faint pigment drawings preserved beneath overhangs indicate that Sigiriya already carried symbolic or ritual significance long before it became a fortified residence. These early markings suggest continuity rather than rupture, a place repeatedly returned to rather than newly discovered. The most conspicuous transformation of Sigiriya is traditionally associated with King Kashapa in the late 5th century CE. During this period, the site was reshaped into a vast complex of gardens, terraces, walls, reservoirs, stairways, and summit structures intricately integrated with the rock itself. What emerges is not merely architecture imposed upon nature, but an engineered landscape in which stone, water, and space are composed as a single system. Approaching Sigiriya, visitors first encounter an expansive sequence of water gardens laid out with striking geometric discipline. Symmetrical pools, straight canals, underground conduits, and pressure-fed fountains, some of which still function during the rainy season, demonstrate a sophisticated grasp of hydraulic principles. These gardens are not ornamental in a superficial sense. They form a ceremonial threshold, an ordered progression that mediates between the surrounding wilderness and the vertical journey upward, suggesting deliberate choreography rather than simple defense. Beyond the water gardens lie the boulder gardens, where massive stones appear repositioned or subtly modified to create passageways, platforms, and enclosed spaces. Here, construction does not erase geology but collaborates with it. Natural forms are emphasized, framed, and redirected, blurring distinctions between what was shaped by human hands and what was inherited from the land itself. Higher still, the ascent tightens into stairways affixed to the rock face. Along this route lie the remnants of the famed Sigiriya frescoes, painted figures whose identity and meaning continue to be debated, alternately interpreted as celestial beings, courtly women, or symbolic forms beyond fixed categorization. Nearby, the polished mirror wall once reflected both image and movement, its surface so finely finished that centuries of visitors inscribed verses upon it, leaving behind a layered record of admiration, memory, and presence. At the summit, archaeological remains indicate a complex and carefully organized layout. Foundations, pools, terraces, and platforms suggest sustained occupation rather than a simple military outpost. Water features improbably maintained at this height, along with apparent visual alignments toward the surrounding plains and distant horizons, hint at considerations that exceed immediate practicality. Conventional historical accounts maintain that Sigiriya was constructed rapidly under Kashyapa, who, having seized the throne, established the site as his royal citadel before its abandonment following his death. Yet the scale
integration, and coherence of the design invite questions about whether such an undertaking could truly have been conceived and executed within such a narrow time frame. The site's relationship with water is particularly revealing. Reservoirs, channels, and hydraulic systems appear across multiple elevations, implying not only technical mastery, but prolonged experimentation, adjustment, and maintenance. These are qualities more commonly associated with evolving traditions than with singular, isolated projects. Geological analysis further shows that many terraces and cuts follow natural fissures in the rock, indicating a careful reading of the stone's internal logic. Other interventions appear almost anticipatory, as though the builders understood how erosion, gravity, and weather would interact with their work over centuries. Such sensitivity complicates the idea of Sigiriya as a sudden creation born of political urgency. Instead, it opens the possibility that the site represents the culmination of a much older architectural and cultural lineage, one gradually adapted to an exceptional natural feature. Nearby locations such as Pitarangala, with its monastic remains and commanding viewpoints, suggest that Sigiriya functioned within a broader sacred and strategic landscape, rather than standing alone as an anomaly. Even the symbolic language of the site resists singular interpretation. Royal imagery, aesthetic refinement, and cosmological suggestion intertwine, producing layered meanings that cannot be reduced to one purpose or narrative. In this light, Sigiriya appears less as a monument to a single ruler's ambition and more as a palimpsest, shaped, reused, and reinterpreted by successive generations who found in the rock a surface already dense with significance. The notion of a lost civilization does not announce itself here through impossible technologies or dramatic contradictions. Instead, it emerges quietly in the tension between the brevity of recorded history and the depth implied by the remains, between the natural and the artificial so seamlessly merged that their boundaries dissolve, and between confident attribution and the unanswered gaps that persist in the archaeological record. It is entirely plausible that what survives today represents only the final expression of a site long cultivated, observed, and modified by cultures whose names have not endured. Their methods may have been inherited rather than invented, their understanding of landscape refined through generations, allowing them to work with a single stone as though it were both mountain and monument. Sigiriya neither demands alternative conclusions nor dismisses them outright. It simply endures, massive, restrained, and silent, offering evidence without explanation. It invites each generation to interpret its surfaces anew. In the end, the rock remains what it has always been, older than any wall or stairway, bearing the traces of human intention while withholding complete clarity about its origins. And it is within that measured silence, balanced between history and prehistory, that the lingering question remains. Not of who built Sigiriya in a single moment, but of how many forgotten hands, minds, and traditions converged there, leaving behind a place that feels at once documented and unfinished, explained, yet still waiting.
High above the sun-scorched ridges of the Jehanabad district in the Indian state of Bihar, the terrain is shaped by immense ancient outcrops of Precambrian granite. From afar, these hills, collectively known as Barabar, rise from the plains like the eroded vertebrae of some colossal, long-buried organism, their jagged silhouettes softened only slightly by thousands of years of relentless heat, wind, and monsoon rain. To the untrained eye, Barabar appears unremarkable, a harsh but familiar geological landscape shaped by natural forces. Yet hidden within these granite ridges lies a set of chambers that challenge many assumptions about ancient engineering and craftsmanship. These caves present one of the most perplexing technical enigmas in South Asian archaeology. The moment one steps inside Lomas Rishi or Sudama Cave, the contrast is immediate and unsettling. The chaotic textures of the natural mountain vanish instantly, replaced by interiors defined by near-perfect geometry. The walls curve smoothly and deliberately, forming spaces that feel more designed than excavated. These chambers are not rough-hewn shelters, but carefully engineered voids carved directly into one of the hardest natural stones on Earth. Granite ranks 6 to 7 on the Mohs scale of hardness, making it far more resistant than limestone or sandstone and extremely difficult to shape without advanced tooling. Yet the interior surfaces of the Barabar caves are not merely smooth, they are polished to an extraordinary mirror-like finish. Even after more than 2,300 years, these surfaces remain reflective, their sheen barely diminished by time. In dim light, a torch or lamp glides across the walls as if reflected by dark glass or polished metal. According to mainstream archaeological consensus, these caves were commissioned during the 3rd century BCE under the rule of Emperor Ashoka of the Mauryan Empire. Inscriptions carved near the entrances explicitly state that several of the caves were donated to the Ajivika sect, an ascetic philosophical movement that once rivaled early Buddhism and Jainism in influence across northern India. However, the attribution raises a number of unresolved technical questions. The most significant concern lies in the tools available during the Mauryan period. Despite extensive archaeological work across the subcontinent, no verified Mauryan-era tools have been discovered that are demonstrably capable of producing this level of precision and polish on curved granite surfaces. The prevailing explanation suggests that large teams of laborers used iron chisels, stone hammers, and prolonged abrasion with sand and water to gradually refine the walls. Yet modern stonemasons and engineers often point out a critical flaw in this theory. Manual abrasion, especially over large curved surfaces, almost always leaves subtle undulations, tool marks, or inconsistencies. In contrast, the walls of the Barabar caves are astonishingly uniform. Measurements show deviations of only fractions of a millimeter across entire chambers. The flatness and symmetry resemble results typically achieved through mechanized grinding or rotary polishing, processes that require consistent pressure, controlled motion, and high-speed abrasion, none of which are clearly evidenced in the Iron Age archaeology of India. The inscriptions themselves add another layer of complexity. While historically invaluable, they are relatively shallow and crudely executed compared to the flawless stonework of the chambers. The disparity between the simplicity of the inscriptions and the sophistication of the architecture has led some researchers to question whether the Mauryans were truly the original builders or whether they were repurposing pre-existing structures whose origins had already faded into antiquity.
Mainstream archaeology continues to affirm Mauryan authorship, yet the absence of transitional or experimental structures nearby remains puzzling. Typically, when a civilization develops a new architectural technique, archaeologists uncover earlier, less refined attempts. At Barabar, no such developmental sequence exists. The caves appear fully realized from the outset, representing a sudden and isolated peak in architectural execution. Beyond their visual precision, the Barabar caves reveal another extraordinary feature: acoustic engineering. These chambers were clearly not intended as ordinary dwellings or storage spaces. Their shapes, often elliptical or circular, create powerful resonant effects. A single clap, chant, or even a whisper can echo for several seconds, reverberating with remarkable clarity throughout the stone interior. This acoustic behavior is not random. The geometry of the chambers strongly suggests intentional design, optimized to amplify and sustain sound. Scholars have proposed that the caves were used for ritual practices involving chanting, meditation, or sensory manipulation, activities consistent with Ajivika ascetic traditions. Some researchers have gone further, exploring the properties of quartz-rich granite, which exhibits piezoelectric behavior, a phenomenon in which mechanical stress or vibration generates small electrical charges.
While there's no evidence that ancient builders understood this effect in modern scientific terms, the interaction between sound, vibration, and stone within these chambers may have produced physiological or psychological effects that were deliberately sought. The logistical challenge of constructing the caves is equally daunting. Each chamber required the removal of hundreds of tons of solid granite, yet there are no significant spoil heaps or debris fields surrounding the hills. How this material was transported, processed, or disposed of remains unclear. The mystery deepens with the unfinished Lomas Rishi cave. While the entrance facade appears incomplete, the interior surfaces that were finished already exhibit the same flawless polish as the completed caves. This suggests that polishing may not have been a final decorative step, but an integral part of the carving process itself, applied as the stone was removed rather than after the chamber was fully hollowed. Attempts to replicate this work using reconstructed Iron Age tools have yielded limited success. Iron chisels dull rapidly against granite, requiring constant resharpening and producing uneven results. Achieving a uniform mirror polish on vaulted surfaces would demand sustained high-energy abrasion far beyond what hand tools typically allow. Today, the Barabar caves stand as a profound archaeological paradox. Either the Mauryan builders possessed a highly specialized stoneworking technique that has left no trace elsewhere in the archaeological record, or the caves represent the inheritance of a much older, technologically sophisticated tradition whose origins remain unknown. Whichever interpretation one favors, the Barabar caves endure as a testament to an extraordinary moment in human history, a moment when stone, geometry, and sound were mastered with a precision that continues to challenge modern understanding.
In the high basin of central Mexico, where volcanic ranges enclose a broad valley and seams of obsidian cut through ancient lava flows, Teotihuacan extends across the landscape with a scale and order that remain immediately legible, even in ruin. Its vast avenues and monumental platforms impose a geometry that feels older than the modern city that now presses against its perimeter, a geometry that asserts coherence rather than chaos. The name by which it is known today was not given by its builders. Centuries after the city's decline, the Aztecs encountered the abandoned ruins and called it Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born. The name reflects reverence rather than memory. By that time, the identity, language, and political structure of those who built the city had already slipped beyond recall, leaving awe to fill the absence of history. Approaching the site along the Avenue of the Dead, the deliberate orientation of the city becomes unmistakable. The entire urban grid is rotated approximately 15.5 degrees east of true north, a deviation repeated with remarkable consistency across major structures. This is not error, but design. The orientation organizes temples, residential compounds, and plazas into a coherent whole that unfolds across more than 20 square kilometers, making Teotihuacan one of the largest cities in the ancient world at its height during the early centuries of the first millennium CE. The Pyramid of the Sun dominates the city both physically and symbolically. Its massive stepped form rises above a natural cave system beneath it, an underground feature that appears to have been known and possibly venerated long before the pyramid was constructed. This suggests that the city's layout was anchored to pre-existing sacred elements, integrating architecture with landscape rather than imposing form upon an empty site. Built from millions of tons of volcanic stone, earth, and rubble, the pyramid's construction reflects a sophisticated understanding of local geology. Its layered fill and retaining walls provide stability in a seismically active region. While interpretations of its dimensions and orientation in relation to solar events or calendrical systems remain debated, there is little doubt that astronomical observation played a role in shaping the city's overall plan. At the northern end of the Avenue of the Dead, the Pyramid of the Moon echoes the form of its larger counterpart. It terminates the avenue against the dramatic backdrop of Cerro Gordo, visually merging mountain and monument into a single composition.
Here, natural topography and built form collapse into one another, reinforcing the sense that Teotihuacan was conceived as a total landscape rather than a collection of isolated structures. The Ciudadelo and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent introduce another layer of meaning. Their sculpted facades display repeating images of plumed serpents and stylized heads, motifs that would later resonate widely across Mesoamerica, but appear here in one of their earliest and most concentrated expressions. Excavations beneath this temple have uncovered mass burials of sacrificial victims arranged with weapons and offerings, indicating state-level ritual practices closely bound to authority, warfare, and cosmology. Despite its monumentality, Teotihuacan remains largely silent in textual terms. No fully deciphered writing system has been conclusively linked to the city, leaving its political organization, spoken language, and self-identification inferred almost entirely from material evidence. Residential compounds, many adorned with complex murals, reveal a densely populated and multi-ethnic metropolis. Artisans, merchants, and migrants from distant regions lived within standardized architectural layouts that balanced uniform planning with localized variation.
Such organization implies centralized coordination, yet the absence of royal tombs or explicit representations of individual rulers complicates traditional models of kingship. Some scholars have proposed that Teotihuacan operated under a more collective or corporate form of governance, a system in which authority was institutional rather than personal. While debated, this possibility underscores how unfamiliar the city's political logic may have been. Economically, Teotihuacan's power rested heavily on control of obsidian sources, enabling it to project influence across much of Mesoamerica. Teotihuacan-style artifacts have been found hundreds of kilometers away, and architectural and artistic elements associated with the city were adopted, adapted, or deliberately resisted by contemporary cultures. Yet, despite this reach, the city's origins remain obscure. Its earliest construction phases show rapid expansion and large-scale planning, as though a comprehensive blueprint had been imposed upon the valley, rather than emerging gradually over generations. This raises questions about where such an urban vision developed and what earlier traditions informed it. Sites such as Cuicuilco and others in the basin hint at antecedents, though many were altered or erased by volcanic eruptions that reshaped the region and displaced populations. Around the middle of the 6th century CE, Teotihuacan entered a period of dramatic decline. Elite structures along the Avenue of the Dead were deliberately burned, followed by a sharp reduction in population. Yet the city was not erased from memory. Instead, it persisted as a place of pilgrimage, its ruins accumulating meaning rather than inhabitants. This pattern of rise, florescence, and abandonment, combined with the loss of the builder's name, has made Teotihuacan fertile ground for speculation about lost civilizations. However, the evidence suggests transformation and internal conflict rather than sudden disappearance. The city's end appears tied to broader regional changes rather than to collapse in isolation. Still, the scale of what was achieved and the apparent speed with which it was realized imply that the knowledge required to design and sustain such a city did not emerge spontaneously. The city's orientation, possibly linked to solar cycles or the observation of specific celestial events, reflects an astronomical tradition integrated into urban planning, one that presumes long-term observation and inherited expertise. Teotihuacan does not announce itself as the product of a lost civilization in the sense of an unknown technological anomaly. Instead, it embodies a form of urbanism whose intellectual foundations are largely absent from surviving records. It stands as a reminder that cities can be both immensely influential and historically anonymous, their power transmitted through trade, ideology, and imitation rather than preserved in written chronicles. As light moves along the Avenue of the Dead, revealing subtle shifts in elevation and alignment that guide the eye toward distant mountains, the city's silence becomes part of its presence. It invites sustained attention rather than dramatic conclusions.
Teotihuacan remains grounded in archaeology and context, yet its ordered vastness and forgotten authorship keep open the possibility that entire systems of thought, once capable of reshaping landscapes on a monumental scale, can fade almost completely, leaving behind only stone, orientation, and the persistent sense that what survives is only a fragment of a far larger, unfinished story.
Göbekli Tepe occupies a limestone ridge overlooking the Harran Plain in southeastern Anatolia, a landscape defined by broad horizons and subtle elevation changes. At first glance, the site appears unremarkable. No towering ruins, no obvious monumentality, just a gently rounded rise shaped by erosion and time. It was precisely this unassuming appearance that allowed it to remain unnoticed for centuries, its significance concealed beneath layers of soil deliberately accumulated over immense spans of time. When systematic excavations began in the mid-1990s under the direction of Klaus Schmidt, the hill revealed itself not as a natural formation, but as a fully artificial mound. Layer by layer, it became clear that Göbekli Tepe was constructed, used, and then intentionally buried multiple times. Each phase sealed beneath the next in a manner that appears purposeful rather than incidental, suggesting cycles of creation and closure rather than abandonment. Radiocarbon dating places the earliest construction phases in the 10th millennium BCE during the pre-pottery Neolithic period. This date alone challenges long-standing assumptions, as it predates agriculture, pottery, metal tools, and permanent villages. According to traditional models, societies at this time were mobile hunter-gatherers, not builders of large-scale stone architecture. Göbekli Tepe disrupts that narrative before any speculation even begins. Emerging from the excavated layers are circular and oval enclosures defined by massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing between 10 and 20 tons. These pillars are set into carved stone sockets and arranged with striking precision around central paired monoliths that dominate each space. The layout is neither random nor improvised. It reflects repetition, symmetry, and a consistent architectural logic across multiple construction phases. The pillars themselves are far from crude. They are finely worked, their surfaces smoothed, edges sharply defined, and many bear relief carvings of animals, foxes, snakes, boars, birds, insects, and other creatures rendered with remarkable restraint and clarity. These figures convey movement and vitality rather than mere decoration. Alongside them appear abstract symbols whose meanings remain unknown, yet recur across different enclosures, implying a shared symbolic system sustained over time. The distinctive T-shape of the pillars invites further interpretation. Subtle reliefs suggest arms folded along the sides and hands meeting at the front, implying that each pillar may represent highly stylized human figures rather than purely structural supports. If so, each enclosure becomes not simply a space, but an assembly, silent anthropomorphic forms arranged around a central axis, facing inward. Notably absent from the site are the hallmarks of domestic life. There are no hearths, no permanent dwellings, no storage facilities, and no clear evidence of daily subsistence activities. This absence strengthens the interpretation that Göbekli Tepe served a function separate from habitation. Faunal remains indicate large-scale feasting events involving wild animals, suggesting periodic gatherings rather than continuous occupation. Such events would have required substantial coordination, the mobilization of labor, the organization of hunting, the transport and carving of stone, and the maintenance of shared purpose across wide territories. All of this appears to have been achieved without agriculture, centralized authority, or formal institutions as traditionally understood.
As excavations continue, it becomes increasingly evident that the exposed structures represent only a fraction of the site. Geophysical surveys indicate dozens of additional enclosures still buried beneath the mound, arranged according to patterns that suggest long-term planning rather than ad hoc construction. Göbekli Tepe was not built once, it was returned to, reworked, and expanded over centuries.
Perhaps most intriguing is how the site was ultimately decommissioned. The enclosures were not left to decay. They were deliberately filled with stone rubble, broken tools, animal bones, and soil. This was not collapse, nor neglect, but careful sealing. The act preserved the architecture and carvings with extraordinary fidelity while removing them entirely from view. Such burial suggests ritual closure rather than decline. Mainstream interpretations describe Göbekli Tepe as an early ritual or ceremonial center, possibly playing a role in the social transformations that eventually led to agriculture. In this model, shared belief systems and repeated ceremonial gatherings may have preceded and even motivated the shift towards sedentary life, reversing the long-held assumption that farming came first. Yet even this framework leaves unresolved questions. The precision of the stonework, the consistency of iconography, and the continuity across generations imply the transmission of complex knowledge over long periods. Quarrying limestone, shaping monoliths, and erecting them with such accuracy requires accumulated experience, planning, and standardized techniques, capabilities difficult to reconcile with purely transient social structures. There are no inscriptions to name the builders, no myths recorded to explain their intentions, no later texts to anchor Göbekli Tepe within a known cultural lineage. The site exists largely outside conventional history, suspended deep within the pre-agricultural past where classification becomes uncertain. Göbekli Tepe neither proves nor requires the existence of a lost civilization in the conventional sense. There is no evidence of empires, advanced technologies, or forgotten sciences. What it does suggest is the presence of sophisticated social and cognitive systems capable of organizing large-scale symbolic projects long before such capacities were thought possible. Its builders may not have vanished so much as transformed, their traditions absorbed into later cultures, their practices evolving into forms that no longer required monumental stone expression. As climates shifted and subsistence strategies changed, sacred landscapes may have relocated elsewhere. Yet the deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe implies remembrance rather than erasure, a conscious decision to end a chapter while preserving it. In this way, Göbekli Tepe functions less as an origin point and more as a pause in deep time, a moment when human communities briefly articulated shared meaning at a monumental scale before moving in new directions. Their pillars remain standing in their circles, slowly emerging from the soil, offering evidence without explanation. Their carved animals are frozen mid-motion. Their human-like forms remain faceless and reserved. They do not proclaim a lost civilization outright, but they quietly insist that the story of human complexity began earlier, unfolded differently, and left behind chapters that were never written, only carved in stone, buried with intent, and left to be rediscovered.
Hidden deep within the Yanshan Mountains near Nanjing, eastern China, lies a site that radically reshapes our understanding of scale in pre-modern engineering. To grasp its magnitude, consider that the heaviest stone blocks used in the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza weigh approximately 70 to 80 tons. Those stones are often cited as benchmarks of ancient ambition. Yet at the Yanshan Quarry, they are rendered almost insignificant. Here, 3 colossal stone components of an unfinished monumental stele remain partially fused to the living mountain, abandoned in mid-construction more than 6 centuries ago. The largest of these pieces, the stele's base, is estimated to weigh over 16,000 tons,
making it the heaviest single worked stone block ever attempted in human history. Had the monument been completed and erected, it would have stood close to 250 feet, approximately 75 meters, rivaling a modern 20-story building. Unlike composite structures, this monument was intended to be assembled from just 3 monolithic elements, all carved directly from a single mountainside. The project was commissioned in the early 15th century by Emperor Ju Di, better known by his reign title, the Yongle Emperor. He ruled the Ming dynasty from 1402 to 1424, ascending the throne after a violent civil war against his nephew. Yongle was among the most powerful and driven rulers in Chinese history, obsessed with legitimizing his reign and projecting imperial authority on an unprecedented scale. This was the same era that produced the Forbidden City in Beijing and launched the legendary maritime expeditions of Admiral Zheng He, whose vast fleets sailed across the Indian Ocean as far as East Africa. Monumental architecture was a key instrument in Yongle's political strategy, and the Yanshan stele was conceived as the ultimate symbol of dynastic power. The monument was intended to honor his father, the founding Ming ruler, Emperor Hongwu, and to stand at the Ming Shaoling Mausoleum near Nanjing. Life during the early Ming period was defined by rigid hierarchy, centralized control, and the mass mobilization of labor. Projects of this scale relied on tens of thousands of conscripted workers, stonemasons, engineers, metalworkers, and unskilled laborers alike. Contemporary records and later local chronicles describe working conditions at Yanshan as exceptionally brutal. Thousands of laborers are believed to have died during excavation, crushed by falling rock, overcome by heat and dust, or simply exhausted by the relentless physical demands of carving massive stone blocks using manual tools. Workers lived in temporary camps near the quarry. Their primary equipment consisted of iron chisels, heavy sledgehammers, wedges, and charcoal-fired forges used to constantly resharpen tools blunted by hard limestone and granite. Even by Ming standards, this was an extreme undertaking. What makes the official explanation that the project was simply abandoned after completion proved inconvenient is the engineering reality of the task. Moving a 16,000-ton stone block would have required a transport surface nearly as rigid as bedrock itself. Any ordinary earthen road would collapse instantly under such pressure. The Ming dynasty possessed no steel cables, no hydraulic jacks, and no mechanical cranes capable of handling loads of this magnitude. Historical sources describe the use of ice roads for transporting heavy stones to Beijing, where water was poured onto winter roads to reduce friction. This technique was effective for blocks weighing tens or even hundreds of tons. But physics imposes limits. The load-bearing capacity of ice depends on thickness and the stability of the ground beneath it. A 16,000-ton block would shatter ice instantly and crush any wooden sledges or rollers beneath it. Even the strongest organic ropes available at the time, hemp, silk, or braided bamboo, would fail under the tensile forces required.
The quarrying process itself was a masterpiece of subtractive engineering. Workers carved vertical channels more than 40 feet deep, often only a few feet wide, slicing directly into the mountain. These trenches formed narrow, suffocating corridors where heat, dust, and danger were constant companions. By cutting beneath the stones, laborers isolated massive blocks on small pedestals, which would eventually be fractured to release the monolith. The precision of these cuts is extraordinary. The rectangular steel body, approximately 160 feet long, shows remarkably clean channel walls with minimal bover cutting or structural cracking. This indicates that Ming engineers had a sophisticated understanding of internal stone stresses and fracture control. Large protruding bosses left on the stone surfaces were not ornamental. In ancient masonry, such features functioned as attachment points for ropes, levers, and pulley systems. Their presence confirms that transportation was planned in advance. Yet, planning alone could not overcome physical reality. The steel base,
measuring roughly 30 meters long and 16 meters high, presented an insurmountable problem. Even with 10,000 men pulling simultaneously, the force required to overcome static friction would exceed the breaking strength of any rope material available in the 15th century. The project was officially abandoned during the 6th year of Yongla's reign. While standard historical narratives cite the sheer weight of the stones as the deciding factor, broader political shifts also played a role. In 1421, Yongla formally moved the imperial capital from Nanjing to Beijing, redirecting vast resources toward northern defenses and monumental construction in the new capital. The Yangshan Quarry was left frozen in time, a colossal half-finished monument embedded in the mountain itself. But this abandonment raises a deeper and more unsettling question. Why was such an obviously unworkable project initiated at all? Ming engineers were among the finest in the world, renowned for canals, bridges, and hydraulic systems. They understood structural limits. The scale of Yangshan suggests an attempt to rival or surpass the megalithic achievements of earlier civilizations. History records 800-ton stones at Baalbek and 1,000-ton obelisks moved in ancient Egypt. Yet by the 15th century, even with advanced mathematics and state-level organization, the Ming could not replicate such feats. This implies that the specialized heavy lifting knowledge required for true megalithic construction did not advance linearly and may have been lost long before the Ming era. Archaeological surveys of the surrounding Yangshan area reveal surprisingly little debris. While some waste stone was likely repurposed for the Ming Shaoliang Mausoleum, the total volume removed to isolate the three monoliths reaches hundreds of thousands of tons. This suggests a highly organized, almost industrial approach to quarry management. Tool mark analysis shows that multiple teams worked simultaneously in shifts, each trained to produce consistent cuts. The uniformity of the marks points to standardized instruction across the workforce. Even so, organization and discipline were no match for raw mass. The Yangshan stele remains the largest failed stone engineering project ever attempted. It stands as a stark reminder that the ability to move and manipulate truly colossal stones is a specialized technological tradition, one that does not automatically improve with time. Rather than a symbol of incompetence, Yangshan is a monument to a civilization reaching for capabilities it no longer possessed, and discovering too late that ambition alone could not overcome the limits of physics. Petra is carved directly into bands of rose-hued sandstone at the junction of arid desert and rugged mountain in southern Jordan, a location defined as much by concealment as by exposure. Unlike cities that announce themselves through height or distant silhouette, Petra withholds its presence. Its most elaborate facades remain hidden behind constricted corridors and folded rock walls, offering little indication of what lies ahead. The approach through the Seek, a narrow, winding gorge formed by tectonic fractures and shaped over millennia by flash flooding, compresses sound, light, and movement until architecture appears almost suddenly, not constructed but revealed, emerging seamlessly from the living stone with a precision that feels geological rather than architectural. This sensation of gradual revelation lies at the heart of Petra's identity. The city is not imposed upon its environment, it is drawn out of it. Its forms follow the grain, coloration, and fracture patterns of the sandstone so closely that they suggest prolonged intimacy with the material rather than opportunistic use. Associated historically with the Nabateans, an Arab people who rose to prominence between the late 4th century BCE and the early 2nd century CE, Petra is widely understood as the capital of a commercial network that controlled key caravan routes linking southern Arabia with the Levant and the Mediterranean world. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation, revealing a city equipped with temples, tombs, markets, residences, and administrative spaces, all sustained by trade wealth and protected by its formidable terrain. Yet Petra resists reduction to a purely mercantile center. Its scale, planning coherence, and especially the sophistication of its water infrastructure suggest ambitions that extended beyond commerce alone. The city's most iconic monument, commonly known as the Treasury, presents a facade inspired by Hellenistic architectural vocabulary, complete with columns, pediments, niches, and sculptural motifs. Carved directly into a vertical cliff face, its proportions remain remarkably balanced despite the irreversible nature of subtractive stonework. Executing such a design from top to bottom, without scaffolding anchored in the rock below, and without margin for correction, required not only technical skill, but absolute confidence in planning and measurement. The relative simplicity of the interior spaces serves as a reminder that the facade itself was the primary statement. It was meant to be approached, encountered, and contemplated rather than occupied. Beyond this structure, Petra unfolds across a vast landscape of rock-cut tombs, freestanding buildings, stairways, colonnaded streets, and open plazas. Many of these elements follow routes dictated by water flow and natural topography, reinforcing the impression that urban design here responded first to landscape logic rather than abstract geometry. Water management stands as Petra's most understated but most extraordinary achievement. In a region marked by unpredictable flash floods and prolonged drought, the Nabateans engineered a complex system of dams, diversion channels, cisterns, pressure-regulated ceramic pipes, and rock-cut conduits that captured seasonal rainfall and distributed it throughout the city. These systems not only mitigated disaster, but enabled sustained urban life on a scale otherwise impossible, transforming a precarious environment into a stable and resilient settlement. The precision with which channels maintain subtle gradients, hugging cliff faces, disappearing into tunnels, and re-emerging downstream, reveals an accumulated understanding of hydrology refined through generations of observation rather than improvised solutions. Although the Nabateans left inscriptions in their own script, these texts are limited, consisting largely of names, dedications, and brief religious references rather than technical explanations. As a result, the intellectual architecture of Petra must be inferred from material evidence rather than written documentation.
Roman annexation in 106 CE introduced new elements to the city, including colonnaded avenues, baths, and formal civic buildings. Yet these additions did not overwrite Petra's foundational logic. The city continued to rely on its original water systems and carved infrastructure, demonstrating the durability and adaptability of the Nabatean framework even under imperial administration. Over time, shifts in long-distance trade, seismic activity, and regional political realignments diminished Petra's importance. By the early medieval period, the city had largely faded from regional consciousness, its population dispersed, and its carved surfaces weathered slowly under desert winds and shifting sands. When European travelers encountered Petra again in the 19th century, it appeared not as a ruin layered with successive occupations, but as a city suspended in time, monumental, intact, and strangely disconnected from any living tradition. This sense of disconnection has fueled perceptions of Petra as the remnant of something lost, not because its builders are unknown, but because the depth of expertise embedded in its stone seems disproportionate to the fragmentary record of how that expertise was cultivated. The Nabateans did not emerge fully formed. They inherited and adapted techniques from earlier regional cultures, drawing upon long-standing knowledge of rock carving, water control, and spatial organization that predates their political ascendancy. Archaeological traces in the surrounding region suggest that the Petra Valley held significance long before its monumental phase, perhaps as a seasonal gathering place or ritual landscape, shaped incrementally over generations. The continuity between natural formations and carved spaces blurs distinctions between sacred and civic, between tomb and temple. Landscape itself appears as an active participant in social and religious life.
The idea of a lost civilization here does not rest on mysterious origins or advanced technologies, but on the erosion of continuity, on how skills refined over centuries can vanish rapidly when the social structures that sustain them dissolve. Petra's abandonment was gradual rather than catastrophic, shaped by economic shifts and environmental pressures. Yet its aftermath feels absolute because so little followed to reinterpret or reuse the site at scale. The city became a memory without inheritors, its methods preserved only where stone resisted decay. As sunlight moves across the canyon walls, shifting from pale pink to gold to deep red, carved facades respond subtly, their details sharpened or erased by shadow. Petra was designed to be experienced through movement and time, rather than grasped in a single view. It offers no challenge to established history, no demand for radical reinterpretation. Instead, it quietly underscores how much of human achievement depends on knowledge that is rarely written down and easily lost. Petra stands as evidence of continuity interrupted, a place where landscape, technique, and belief aligned so completely that their absence afterward registers as silence rather than conclusion. In that silence, the city remains present yet incomplete, its stone surfaces bearing the imprint of a civilization fully realized in its moment and still gesturing toward deeper layers of human experience from which it emerged.
At the margin where the fertile lands of the Nile Valley dissolve into the limestone plateau of the Western Desert, the Great Pyramid of Giza rises with a composure that conceals its immensity. Its geometry does not overwhelm through ornament or excess, but through clarity. Clean lines press against sky and horizon, asserting order with a restraint that feels intentional rather than ostentatious, measured rather than theatrical. Even in its altered state, stripped of most of its original polished casing stones, the Great Pyramid remains the largest and most precisely constructed pyramid ever completed. Its alignment to the cardinal directions achieves a degree of accuracy that continues to challenge modern surveying techniques. The base is leveled to within mere centimeters across a span of more than 200 meters, and the inclination of its four faces is repeated with near-perfect consistency, a feat requiring extraordinary control over materials, measurement, and execution. The pyramid is conventionally dated to the 4th dynasty of Egypt's Old Kingdom, around 2580 to 2560 BCE, and attributed to the reign of King Khufu. Within traditional narratives, it is presented as the culmination of a long architectural evolution, progressing from early mastaba tombs through step pyramids to the true pyramidal form perfected at Giza. Yet the structure itself resists being understood as a simple endpoint. Its execution suggests not experimentation, but command. The techniques required to realize such a project appear fully formed, as though refined elsewhere long before they were committed so definitively to stone on the Giza Plateau. There is little visible evidence of trial and error. Instead, the monument conveys confidence, coherence, and a striking absence of improvisation. The pyramid's core consists of approximately 2.3 million limestone blocks, many weighing several tons. The granite beams used in the king's chamber were quarried at Aswan, hundreds of kilometers to the south, transported along the Nile, shaped with precision, and positioned deep within the structure. Internal passageways ascend and descend through the mass, their angles carefully calculated, their surfaces smoothed, their junctions exact. These corridors lead to chambers that appear both structurally necessary and symbolically resonant. The Grand Gallery, with its steeply rising, corbelled walls, functions as both an architectural solution and a spatial experience. Its form helps redistribute stress away from the central chambers while simultaneously directing movement upward. The proportions suggest careful mathematical planning rather than ad hoc adjustment. Small shafts extending from the upper chambers, once assumed to be purely functional, align towards specific regions of the sky.
a detail that has prompted interpretations connecting the pyramid to stellar cosmology, particularly the circumpolar stars later associated with royal immortality. These alignments are subtle rather than declarative. They coexist seamlessly with practical engineering concerns, such as load distribution, stability, and long-term durability. The result is a structure in which symbolic intent and technical mastery appear fully integrated, not competing priorities, but parallel expressions of a unified design philosophy. Archaeological evidence surrounding the Giza Plateau supports the presence of a large, well-organized workforce. Excavated workers' villages, bakeries, administrative facilities, and cemeteries challenge older narratives of slave labor, instead pointing to a state-sponsored project involving skilled laborers, rotating crews, and centralized planning. Even so, this context does not fully explain how such organizational sophistication emerged so decisively, nor why it was never surpassed.
Subsequent pyramids, though numerous, fail to match the Great Pyramid in scale, precision, or structural integrity. Many exhibit compromises, steeper angles, inferior foundations, or internal collapses that are notably absent at Giza. This decline complicates linear models of progress and raises questions about the transmission of knowledge across generations. The mathematical relationships embedded in the pyramid's dimensions, ratios that approximate pi or reflect harmonic proportions, add another layer of intrigue. Whether intentional or emergent from practical geometry remains debated. Their significance lies less in claims of hidden knowledge than in the sense of internal coherence they convey, as though the builders were working within a conceptual framework that has not survived in written form. Texts from the Old Kingdom offer little insight into construction techniques. Inscriptions focus on divine kingship, ritual legitimacy, and cosmological order, leaving modern scholars to reconstruct methods through tool marks, quarry evidence, and experimental archaeology. These reconstructions demonstrate feasibility. They show how the pyramid could have been built. Yet feasibility alone does not fully account for the assuredness of execution or the apparent willingness to commit unprecedented resources to a form that was never again equaled. Geological studies of the plateau indicate that the site was carefully selected. The bedrock is capable of bearing immense weight, the elevation protects against Nile flooding, and ancient channels facilitated transport. Beneath the pyramid, natural fissures and cavities were incorporated into the design rather than avoided, implying a detailed understanding of subsurface conditions. This suggests prolonged familiarity with the landscape, not opportunistic placement. Over centuries, the Great Pyramid has accumulated layers of interpretation. Medieval travelers viewed it as a repository of lost wisdom. Modern researchers employ muon tomography to probe its interior, revealing previously unknown voids whose purpose remains uncertain. These discoveries do not overturn established chronology, but they reinforce the fact that the structure continues to withhold aspects of its design, despite intense scrutiny. The idea of a lost civilization often attaches itself to the Great Pyramid not because of implausible origins, but because of this persistent opacity. The monument feels simultaneously over-examined and unresolved. The deeper mystery lies not in who built it, but in continuity. How such a concentration of architectural, mathematical, and organizational knowledge arose, how it was transmitted, and why it appears to recede rather than advance in later periods. It is possible that the Great Pyramid represents the apex of a tradition whose earlier expressions were less durable than stone. Along the Nile, long before written history recorded names and dates, knowledge may have been accumulated, refined, and passed down through means now lost. Floods, climatic shifts, and cultural transformations could have erased those earlier stages, leaving the pyramid not as a beginning, but as the most enduring survivor of a much longer trajectory. Seen in this light, the Great Pyramid does not demand radical reinterpretation. It stands instead as a reminder that human history is unevenly preserved, that moments of exceptional achievement can become isolated by time rather than clearly linked to what came before or after.
As the sun moves across the plateau, casting sharp shadows along its faces, the structure remains unchanged, absorbing centuries of explanation without yielding a final account of itself. It does not proclaim the existence of a lost civilization, yet it quietly allows for the possibility that knowledge can peak, crystallize, and then fade, leaving behind a single immense form that feels both inevitable and inexplicable, firmly grounded in history while still pointing toward chapters of human ingenuity that lie beyond the reach of surviving records.